What do you do when the person who hurt you walks away without looking back? No apology, no explanation, no regret. When the story ends, but the wound stays open, we're told that healing begins with, "I'm sorry," yet life doesn't always give us that luxury. Sometimes silence is all we get, and that silence can be louder than the pain itself. It follows you into quiet moments, replays itself at night, and shows up when you least expect it. You try to move on, but something keeps pulling you back, not to them, but to what they took from you. The peace, the trust, the version of yourself you were before the damage. So here's the uncomfortable truth: waiting for an apology gives someone else control over your healing. And the hardest kind of forgiveness isn't offered across a table. It's chosen alone in the moments when no one is watching and no one is sorry. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as something you give to another person, like a gift handed over once they've earned it. That misunderstanding is what keeps people stuck. When you believe forgiveness requires the other person's permission, apology, or remorse, you unknowingly place your peace in their hands. You wait for a moment that may never arrive. You replay conversations that never happened. You imagine accountability that never comes. And while they continue living unaware or unmoved, you remain emotionally tied to the moment they hurt you. Forgiveness, in its truest form, has nothing to do with their readiness and everything to do with your well-being. Peace is internal. It doesn't depend on explanations or closure from someone else. When you forgive for your own peace, you are not excusing the harm or rewriting history. You are simply refusing to let that history keep controlling your present. Anger feels justified, and sometimes it is, but prolonged anger becomes a place you live in rather than a response you pass through. It shows up in your thoughts, your reactions, and your relationships. It quietly drains energy that could be used for growth, creativity, and connection. Forgiveness interrupts that cycle, not by denying pain, but by choosing not to be ruled by it. Many people resist forgiveness because they believe it gives the other person power or relief they don't deserve. In reality, withholding forgiveness rarely affects the person who caused the harm. They may never know. They may never care. The one who pays the price is the one holding on to the resentment. Forgiveness for your peace is an act of self-respect. It says that your mental and emotional health matters more than proving a point or waiting for justice to look a certain way. It's a decision to stop revisiting the wound every time their name crosses your mind. Forgiving without permission also means reclaiming control. Trauma and betrayal often come with a loss of agency. Something was taken from you without consent. Holding on to the pain can feel like the last connection to that moment, as if letting go means losing your voice. But forgiveness doesn't silence you, it strengthens you. It allows you to acknowledge what happened without letting it define who you become. You can remember, learn, and protect yourself differently moving forward, all while choosing not to carry emotional debt that isn't yours to pay. Peace doesn't arrive all at once when you decide to forgive. It's gradual and sometimes uncomfortable. There are days when old feelings resurface, when anger feels justified again, when forgiveness feels unfair. Forgiveness for your peace isn't a single moment of grace, it's a repeated choice. Each time you choose not to rehearse the hurt, not to personalize someone else's brokenness, not to let bitterness guide your behavior, you move closer to freedom. That freedom is quiet, steady, and deeply personal. Forgiving without their permission also creates emotional boundaries. You can forgive and still keep distance. You can forgive and still say no. Forgiveness does not require access. It does not require trust to be rebuilt. It simply removes the emotional charge that keeps you stuck in the past. When forgiveness is about peace, it becomes less about them and more about how you want to live. Calm instead of chaos, clarity instead of confusion, forward movement instead of emotional paralysis. At its core, forgiving for your peace is an acknowledgement that you deserve a life not defined by someone else's actions. You deserve rest from carrying resentment. You deserve mornings that aren't weighed down by yesterday's wounds. You deserve emotional space to grow into who you are becoming rather than who you were when you were hurt. Forgiveness doesn't ask you to forget what happened. It asks you to stop letting it take more from you than it already has. And in choosing that, you begin to shift your focus inward toward healing that doesn't require anyone else to change, explain, or apologize. Healing is often framed as something that begins once the other person admits fault, takes responsibility, and offers an apology that feels sincere and complete. That belief sounds reasonable, even fair, but it quietly places your recovery on hold. When healing depends on an apology, it becomes conditional, delayed, and fragile. You wait for words that may never be spoken from someone who may never understand the depth of the harm they caused. In that waiting, pain stays active. It doesn't fade, it waits with you. An apology can be meaningful, but it is not a requirement for healing, because healing is not a negotiation between two people. It is an internal process that belongs entirely to the one who was hurt. People who cause harm are often unable or unwilling to acknowledge it. Some lack self-awareness. Some are protecting their ego. Some are so disconnected from their own emotions that accountability feels threatening. Expecting an apology from such a place can keep you emotionally tethered to someone who has already shown they cannot meet you where you are. Healing that relies on their growth or honesty gives them continued influence over your emotional state. When you accept that an apology may never come, you begin the process of reclaiming that influence for yourself. The absence of an apology does not invalidate your pain. Hurt does not require confirmation to be real. Your experience stands on its own, whether or not someone else recognizes it. When healing waits for acknowledgement, it subtly teaches you to doubt your own reality, to question whether what you felt was justified. Letting go of the need for an apology is an act of self-trust. It's choosing to believe yourself without needing external validation. That belief becomes a foundation for healing that is steady instead of conditional. An apology can provide clarity, but clarity can also come from reflection. Understanding does not always come from the person who caused the damage. Sometimes it comes from observing patterns, recognizing limitations, and accepting that some people cannot give what they never learned to carry. Healing begins when you stop asking, "Why did they do this?" and start asking, "What do I need now?" That shift moves the focus from their behavior to your recovery, from the past to the present. There is also a hidden danger in waiting for an apology, the hope that it will erase the pain. Even when apologies are given, they rarely undo the emotional impact of betrayal or loss. Words cannot rewind time. They cannot restore trust instantly or repair the nervous system's response to harm. Healing requires more than acknowledgement. It requires processing, boundaries, and self-compassion. When an apology becomes the imagined cure, it can lead to disappointment, even if it eventually arrives. By releasing the belief that healing depends on those words, you allow yourself to do the deeper work that actually leads to relief. Letting go of the need for an apology does not mean suppressing anger or grief. Those emotions still deserve space. Healing without an apology means feeling what needs to be felt without directing it towards someone who may never receive it. Journaling, therapy, honest conversations with trusted people, and quiet self-reflection can all become places where unspoken words are released. Expression does not need an audience to be valid. The body and mind need release more than recognition. There is a form of strength in accepting that closure is something you create, not something you are given. Closure is often misunderstood as a final conversation or explanation, but in reality, it is a decision to stop seeking answers from a source that has proven unreliable. Healing without an apology is choosing peace over resolution, acceptance over explanation. It's understanding that some chapters end without clarity, and that clarity can still be built from the lessons left behind. When healing no longer depends on an apology, emotional independence grows. You stop measuring your progress by their actions or silence. You begin to notice subtle shifts within yourself, less rumination, fewer emotional spikes, more moments of calm. These changes are signs that healing is happening on your terms. The pain may not disappear all at once, but it loses its grip. It no longer controls your reactions or dictates your sense of self-worth. An apology can be meaningful, but healing that requires it gives away too much power. Healing that comes from within is quieter, slower, and more durable. It rests on the understanding that your well-being is not a reward someone else gets to grant, and that the absence of remorse from another person does not disqualify you from moving forward, rebuilding your sense of safety, and learning how to carry yourself differently through the world without waiting for permission from the past. Anger often feels like a natural response to being hurt. It rises quickly, gives shape to pain, and creates a sense of protection. In the beginning, anger can even feel empowering, as if it restores balance after something unjust has happened. But when anger is held onto for too long, it quietly changes its role. What once felt like armor slowly becomes a chain. Instead of shielding you from harm, it keeps you emotionally bound to the very moment you wish you could escape. The hurt may be over, but anger keeps it present, replaying it again and again in the mind. When anger lingers, it keeps the nervous system in a constant state of alert. The body reacts as if the threat is still active even when the situation has long passed. Thoughts circle back to the same memories, the same words, the same images. Each replay reinforces the emotional connection to the pain, strengthening it rather than dissolving it. In this way, anger becomes a bridge between the past and the present, allowing old wounds to intrude on current moments that have nothing to do with the original harm. Holding on to anger also keeps your attention focused outward, fixed on the person or situation that caused the pain. Your inner world becomes organized around what they did, what they should have done, and how things could have been different. This constant focus gives the past a kind of authority over your present life. Even in their absence, they continue to occupy space in your thoughts and emotions. The hurt remains active not because it is still happening, but because anger keeps reopening it. There is a subtle cost to this attachment. Anger consumes emotional energy, often without being noticed. It influences reactions, shortens patience, and colors perceptions. Small frustrations can feel larger, and neutral situations can trigger disproportionate responses. Over time, this emotional strain affects relationships, decision-making, and self-perception. The pain that originated from one source begins to spread, touching areas of life that were never part of the original injury. Many people fear that letting go of anger means letting go of justice or self-respect. Anger can feel like proof that what happened mattered. It can feel like the last evidence that a line was crossed. But remembering the harm does not require staying angry. Awareness and boundaries can exist without emotional attachment. When anger is released, the memory remains, but it loses its charge. The event becomes something that happened, not something that is still happening internally. Anger also creates an illusion of control. It can feel like staying angry keeps you strong, alert, and prepared. In reality, it often limits growth. When emotional energy is tied up in resentment, there is less room for curiosity, creativity, and healing. New experiences are filtered through old wounds. Trust becomes difficult, not because every situation is dangerous, but because the past is still being consulted as a warning system. The hurt continues to shape expectations long after it should have been allowed to rest. Letting go of anger does not mean denying pain or rushing forgiveness. It means recognizing when anger has outlived its purpose. Pain needs acknowledgement, but it does not need permanent residence. When anger is released, attention begins to shift inward. Instead of asking why someone hurt you, the focus turns to how the hurt affected you and what is needed now. This shift weakens the emotional tie to the original event and strengthens a sense of agency. As anger loosens its grip, emotional space opens. Thoughts become less repetitive, reactions soften, the body relaxes in ways that are subtle but noticeable. The past stops demanding constant attention. This does not erase what happened, but it changes the relationship to it. The hurt no longer defines the emotional landscape. It becomes one part of a larger story rather than the central theme. Holding on to anger keeps pain alive by feeding it attention and energy. Releasing anger allows pain to move through rather than remain stuck. It creates distance between who you are now and what you endured then. That distance is not indifference. It is freedom from being emotionally anchored to a moment that no longer deserves control over your inner life. Forgiveness is often confused with forgetting, excusing, or minimizing harm, and that confusion is one of the main reasons people resist it. When someone causes pain, the memory of that experience becomes a form of self-protection. It teaches awareness, caution, and discernment. Forgetting entirely would mean erasing lessons that were learned through difficulty. Forgiveness does not require that kind of erasure. It allows memory to remain intact while releasing the emotional grip attached to it. The experience stays, but it no longer controls reactions, decisions, or self-worth. Remembering what happened is not a failure to forgive. It is a natural function of the mind, especially when the experience involved betrayal, loss, or emotional injury. The brain records these moments to prevent repetition. Forgiveness simply changes how those memories are held. Instead of being charged with anger, fear, or resentment, they become neutral reference points. They inform boundaries rather than dictate emotional responses. The memory exists, but it no longer demands constant emotional engagement. Another common misconception is that forgiving someone means allowing them back into your life or giving them another opportunity to cause harm. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. You can forgive someone and still recognize that they are unsafe, unreliable, or incapable of change. Forgiveness does not override discernment. In fact, it often sharpens it. When emotions are less reactive, judgment becomes clearer. You are able to see patterns more accurately and make decisions based on reality rather than hope or fear. Allowing harm again is not an obligation tied to forgiveness. Boundaries are a form of self-respect, not punishment. They exist to protect well-being, not to prove a point. Forgiveness does not ask you to lower those boundaries. It simply removes the emotional hostility that can make boundaries feel heavy or exhausting. With forgiveness, boundaries become calm and firm rather than reactive or defensive. Some people believe that holding onto anger or distance is necessary to prevent future harm. While caution is wise, constant emotional guarding can become its own form of suffering. Living in a state of vigilance can limit openness and connection. Forgiveness reduces that internal tension without removing external protections. It allows you to stay aware without staying wounded. You can remain careful without remaining closed. Forgiveness also does not mean minimizing what happened or pretending it was not serious. Pain deserves acknowledgement. Harm deserves to be named accurately. Forgiveness does not rewrite the story to make it easier for others to digest. It allows you to tell the truth without carrying the emotional burden indefinitely. You can say, "This hurt me," without needing to relieve that hurt every time you remember it. There is also a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. Reconciliation requires mutual effort, accountability, and change. Forgiveness does not. It is a one-sided process that happens internally. Confusing the two can lead people to stay in unhealthy situations out of a sense of moral obligation. Forgiveness does not demand continued contact. It does not require rebuilding trust where it has been broken. Trust is earned through consistent behavior, not granted through forgiveness. Choosing not to allow harm again is a sign of growth, not bitterness. It reflects an understanding of personal limits and needs. Forgiveness supports that growth by removing emotional clutter. When anger and resentment are released, decisions are no longer fueled by a need to defend against the past. They are guided by present awareness and self-respect. This clarity makes it easier to walk away from situations that mirror old wounds without needing to justify or explain the choice extensively. Forgiveness creates space for learning without lingering pain. The experience becomes something you have integrated rather than something you are still fighting. You remember what happened, You recognize warning signs and you honor your boundaries, but you do so without carrying emotional weight that distorts perception. The past becomes informative rather than oppressive. In this way, forgiveness is not about giving someone another chance or pretending nothing happened. It is about choosing to move forward with awareness, strength, and self-protection intact, allowing memory to serve wisdom instead of pain, and ensuring that growth comes from experience rather than from continued suffering tied to what has already been endured. Compassion is often mistaken for agreement or closeness, but it can exist independently of both. It is possible to understand someone's humanity without inviting them back into your life or minimizing the harm they caused. Compassion without reconciliation begins with recognizing that people are shaped by their own histories, limitations, and unresolved pain. This understanding does not excuse harmful behavior, but it provides context. It allows you to see that what someone did may have come from their own brokenness rather than from your worth or failure. When reconciliation is removed from the equation, compassion becomes safer and more honest. Reconciliation requires trust, accountability, and consistent change, all of which depend on the other person's willingness and capacity to grow. Compassion, on the other hand, is internal. It is a way of relating to the situation without hatred or dehumanization. You can acknowledge that someone caused damage while also recognizing that they are more than their worst action. This perspective reduces emotional intensity without denying reality. Compassion without reconciliation also protects boundaries. It allows emotional distance without hostility. Instead of cutting someone off with anger or resentment, you step back with clarity. This kind of distance is not cold, it is intentional. It reflects an understanding that connection is not always healthy, even when forgiveness or empathy is present. Compassion makes that separation less charged and more grounded, which can bring a sense of inner calm rather than ongoing conflict. Choosing compassion does not mean suppressing anger or grief. Those emotions can coexist with understanding. Compassion simply prevents those emotions from hardening into bitterness. It keeps the heart from becoming rigid. When compassion is present, anger is less likely to define identity or behavior. You can feel what you feel without letting it turn into a permanent state of opposition toward another person. There is also a freedom in compassion without reconciliation because it releases the expectation that things must be fixed or restored. Not every relationship is meant to be repaired. Some are meant to be understood, learned from, and then left behind. Compassion allows you to release the fantasy of resolution. It acknowledges that some endings are incomplete and that this incompleteness does not have to be filled with resentment. Seeing someone through a compassionate lens can reduce self-blame. When harm is understood as a reflection of another person's limitations, it becomes easier to separate their actions from your self-worth. Compassion helps reframe the narrative from, "This happened because I wasn't enough," to, "This happened because they were unable or unwilling to act differently." This shift can be deeply healing, especially in situations where manipulation, neglect, or emotional unavailability were involved. Compassion without reconciliation also supports emotional maturity. It requires holding two truths at once: that someone hurt you and that they are still human. This balance prevents extremes. It avoids excusing behavior while also avoiding demonization. Emotional maturity grows in that middle space where complexity is allowed and simple labels are resisted. This complexity leads to a more stable inner world, less driven by reactive judgments. Maintaining compassion from a distance can also reduce the desire for revenge or validation. When you understand that someone may never fully grasp the impact of their actions, the need for them to get it weakens. Compassion accepts that their awareness may be limited. This acceptance removes the emotional tug of war that keeps you invested in their recognition or remorse. Over time, compassion becomes a form of self-care. It softens the internal environment. Instead of replaying hurt with hostility, the mind learns to observe it with understanding. This does not erase pain, but it makes it less corrosive. The energy that once went into anger can be redirected toward growth, connection, and creativity. Compassion without reconciliation is not about reopening doors. It is about closing them gently. It allows you to move forward without carrying contempt or unresolved emotional charge. By choosing compassion, you choose not to let someone else's inability to love, respect, or change turn you into someone hardened by their actions, preserving your capacity for empathy while still honoring the boundaries that protect your well-being. Letting go is often misunderstood as surrender, as if releasing pain means admitting defeat or allowing injustice to go unanswered. In reality, letting go requires a kind of strength that is rarely loud or visible. It is not the strength of confrontation or control, but the strength of restraint. It asks you to loosen your grip on something that once felt necessary for survival. Pain can become familiar, even comforting in a strange way, because it explains why you feel the way you do. Letting go removes that explanation and leaves you face to face with yourself, which takes courage. Quiet strength does not announce itself. It does not seek validation or recognition. Letting go happens internally, often unnoticed by others. There is no audience for the moment you decide to stop replaying a memory, to stop checking for signs of remorse, to stop imagining different outcomes. That decision is made alone, and it asks you to trust that peace is worth more than proof. It requires confidence in your ability to live without the armor of resentment. Weakness clings. It holds tightly because it is afraid of what will happen without the weight it has been carrying. Letting go, on the other hand, is an act of trust. It trusts that you can move forward without dragging the past behind you. It trusts that you can protect yourself without staying angry. This kind of trust is built slowly through repeated choices to disengage from what no longer serves you. There is strength in choosing not to react. When you let go, you stop giving automatic emotional responses to old triggers. You pause where you once exploded or shut down. That pause is not emptiness, it is control. It shows that the past no longer dictates your behavior. You are no longer living in response mode, constantly adjusting yourself around a wound. That shift requires discipline and self-awareness, both signs of inner strength. Letting go also means releasing the need to be understood by the person who hurt you. Wanting them to understand is human, but needing it can keep you trapped. Quiet strength accepts that some people will never see their actions clearly. Instead of fighting that reality, you step out of the struggle. You stop trying to prove your pain. This does not mean your pain wasn't real. It means you no longer need their acknowledgement to validate it. Another aspect of strength in letting go is resisting the urge to define yourself by what you survived. Pain can become an identity if it is held too tightly. Letting go allows you to be more than your wounds. It opens space for parts of yourself that were overshadowed by hurt. Growth requires that space. Without it, life becomes a cycle of reaction rather than creation. Letting go also takes patience. It rarely happens all at once. There are moments when old feelings resurface, when anger feels justified again, when memories return unexpectedly. Quiet strength is choosing not to follow those feelings back into the past. It is allowing them to pass without building a story around them. This restraint is not suppression. It is mastery. You acknowledge what arises without letting it take over. Choosing to let go does not erase boundaries. Strength does not mean exposure. You can release emotional attachment while still protecting yourself from further harm. In fact, letting go often makes boundaries clearer. When emotions are less charged, decisions are less confused. You walk away not because you are overwhelmed, but because you are certain. There is also strength in accepting that healing does not require closure in the traditional sense. Letting go means creating closure through acceptance rather than explanation. You stop demanding that the past make sense before you move forward. This acceptance is not passive, it is deliberate. It reflects an understanding that your life cannot remain on hold waiting for clarity that may never come. Letting go changes how you carry yourself. There is less tension in your thoughts, less urgency in your emotions. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of defend. This calm is not indifference. It is resilience that has settled into your nervous system. The strength is quiet because it no longer needs to prove anything. It simply exists, steady and self-contained, rooted in the decision to move forward without dragging the weight of what has already taken enough from you. Forgiving someone who isn't sorry is one of the hardest choices a person can make because it asks you to stop waiting for something outside yourself to change. It asks you to take responsibility for your own peace. Forgiveness is not about approval, forgetting, or reopening doors that should remain closed. It is about releasing the hold the past has on your inner world. When you forgive without an apology, you loosen anger's grip, reclaim emotional energy, and choose calm over chaos. You learn that compassion can exist without closeness, that boundaries can remain firm without bitterness, and that letting go is not weakness but quiet strength. In choosing forgiveness, you do not erase what happened. You simply refuse to let it define what happens next. You move forward lighter, clearer, and grounded in the understanding that your peace is worth more than waiting for someone else to be sorry.